Hey everyone, I'm Akshay.
And I'm Ishika.
The thing about wildlife is anyone can fall in love with it through science, photography, literature, or innocent observation.
Sharing their love today is Nishant Srinivasaiah, a behavioral ecologist who studies elephants wherever they take him.
So I still remember the first conversation I had with the behavioral ecologist Anindya Sinha way back in 2013. I was this young guy wanting to get into this field, and he was telling me all about his students. And I was shocked when he said, I have this student who's working on elephants, and because elephants live for 60, 70 years, the PhD should be at least 25 years, and that's the only way we get enough data. That was you. So today we have with us Nishant Srinivasaiah, who is in his 16th year of his 25-year PhD, I think. Welcome, Nishant. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi. Hello, Akshay. So nice to hear from you. And yeah, I've probably inching closer to those 25 years, but I know how long I can actually sustain this. But yeah, inching closer.
Awesome. Welcome, Nishant. And just before we jump into questions and stuff, I'm just going to tell our listeners a little bit more about you. So, Nishant is a behavioral ecologist who studies Asian elephants in human dominated landscapes. And he's just finished his doctoral work with the National Institute of Advanced Sciences under Rana, as we affectionately call him, or Anindya Sinha, like Akshay just mentioned. And he's fascinated by the behavioral plasticity of large mammals in their changing environments. Now, this is very technical, and we're going to break this down over the course of this conversation. So we can hold on to that. So let's start a little. Let's ease our way in, Nishant, and I'm going to start by asking you why elephants? What led you to study elephants, and what's so fascinating about them?
Hello, Ishika. Very nice to hear from you. And thanks so much for having me here, both of you. Um, and you're right. Anindya Sinha, who we very fondly call Rana, is also the person, like Akshay mentioned, who hooked me on to doing a long-term project on individual elephants. Um, and I think Rana has his own way of making sure that his students stay with him for the longest time. And this is one of the hooks that he uses, I think. But it's been wonderful. I mean, um, why elephants? Now, I very often ask this question to myself, and I wonder why I am sort of attracted like this small piece of metal to a big black magnet over there, which is the elephant for me, and it draws me every time. Um, but I remember, and this is only because my parents keep telling me that I used to watch a lot of Apu or Papu, on Doordarshan. I don't know if both of you have seen this, but this was this cartoon animation thing that was happening on Doordarshan, and my plan for Sunday would be to watch Apu or Papu so that I can see that elephant. And I also grew up in Mysore in southern India, and we were not very far from large parks, wildlife reserves, tiger reserves. Nagarole was very close, and that's a place where my parents would often take me over during the holidays. And we would go with a lot of people, in fact, their friends and all of them. And they would always show me elephants for some reason. And then on the road itself, we used to see a lot of elephants. And that somehow sort of attracted me so much to the point that I wanted to know more about the sociality of these animals. Why were they in groups? Why were they so big? Why were they trumpeting that day? What was happening with the calf, which was with the adult? Things like this. And so, because I was in that setting, and in Mysore, there was also the Mysore Zoo, and there was an amazing opportunity to join the Zoo Youth Club. And so as soon as I was legally eligible to join, or the legal age to join the Zoo Youth Club, which was I think then 13 or 14 years, I joined it. And every Sunday I would go and sit in front of the elephant enclosure. Then I didn't have, ideas of, oh, this enclosure is so small, the elephants are not very happy necessarily in this small space. And the wild elephants, it's something that I would see during the holidays, and I would really not connect the two. But then what I connected with a lot is sitting and watching elephants and listening to the mahouts who were talking about the elephants as individuals. They would never say, oh, this aane, ee aane hig marto, this elephant did this. They would always say, Ganesh did this, or somebody else did this. So it was the individual name that they would use, because each elephant, and they recognize this very well, right? Because they work with the elephants so closely. So they recognize that each individual is very different. And so they would look at them as individuals. And that's something, again, that sat with me. And I could never see an elephant as an elephant after that. It was always an individual for me. So that's how I got hooked on. And finally, a lot of struggle. It's not that my parents come from a background where they knew of wildlife biology and conservation as a field, something which you can make a career out of. So even today, a lot of people, when they ask me and they say, "Oh, we hear that you study elephants. So are you a wildlife photographer? Are you a wildlife filmmaker? Or will you be on Nat Geo? Do you have anything on Nat Geo?" So it's very difficult to communicate and say, "Look, a lot of my work involves just sitting and watching elephants. I don't do anything else. So I don't go and handle them. I don't climb on them." Or nor do I actually take brilliant photographs. I only take photographs enough to show evidence in some sense, and also to study those photographs and see what information we can gather. Other than that, we don't do much. And they're literally disappointed. "Oh, really? Is that what your work is?" And the final question, of course, they ask is, "So do you earn any money at all?" And the obvious answer is no, not much. Yeah, but it's all really interesting, because you see an elephant for the day. I mean, you're so satisfied that nothing else matters for that. So that's how I got into elephants. And luckily, wildlife biology and conservation happened during my master's, and jumped. I really should thank all those, those panel of people who select you. I don't know if you guys had that. There were some 13 people who would question and see if you're eligible to join. Somehow, somebody thought that, okay, this guy, we can actually put him in this course, and luckily got in. And then after that, it has been just amazing. I mean, I would no regrets at all. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it's so cool how many people from our field have very personal histories for why they've gotten into this. Either just the field in itself, or the animal or system that they choose to work with later. And I think that's something that really sets each researcher apart. It's not just the science that you do, but also the motivations behind it. And it helps us also, I think, understand your science a lot better, knowing where you're coming from. So, like Kaksha was mentioning earlier, that studying an elephant is a process of eternity for a human. I mean, sometimes an elephant subject that you're studying may even outlive you, depending on when you start observing this individual. So you will also be going through a lot of your own personal milestones as you observe this elephant over time. So what is it like to grow as a scientist and a person along with the animals you're studying? What is that process like?
Yeah, thanks, Ishika. I mean, that's a very, very important question, actually, and it's something that we grapple with all the time, as to where you can actually draw a boundary, if at all you can draw one. How much is it organic, that you're involved so much with your individual elephant that you're studying, or the landscape that you're working, that the lines are often blurred as to where it's what is technically called as an objective evaluation versus a subjective one. And I think we've grown to embrace subjectivity more and more. Also in the sense that if we only go and sort of look at what the elephant is doing and measure it only in terms of counts, only in terms of the frequencies at which the elephant did a particular action, a lot of the nuance and the fineness of the behavior, the nitty-gritties of the behavior is often lost. And this is something that I realized quite late, in fact. And just before I wanted to sort of go on full term into elephant studies and behavior, initially I thought being an elephant doctor is the only way you can get close to an elephant, until the MSc Wildlife happened, and then Rana said you can actually study elephants too and observe them. And so that's when I realized, okay, now if I'm observing the elephant, I need to sort of prepare myself for it. Because like you're saying, how well can we interpret an elephant's behavior as a human? How much of anthropomorphism are we bringing in to our observations? Can we actually get to know elephants the way they are, rather than projecting our values and our ideas and our experiences onto an elephant? And that is very easy to do, because a lot of people I've seen actually, in fact, including me, I've done it a lot of times, we do project our values onto the elephant. And we've tried as much as possible, I've tried personally as much as possible to steer away, keep away from it. And I'll give you a few of the examples that will sort of show you how we managed to do it. But then, how do I actually look at an elephant behavior, understand what the elephant is doing? So just before I started my doctoral studies, I decided, okay, I have to go and live with the mahouts and the elephants in captivity, because the mahouts interact with these elephants so closely, in such close quarters, that even subtle behaviors they must be able to pick up. And they're amazing when it comes to elephants, understanding their behavior, even sometimes predicting what they're doing and things like that. And if you go and speak to a lot of the people who observe elephants, you'll see, the trunk movement is doing this, the ear flap is doing this, the tail is doing this, the body is doing this. The mahout said, if you want to really understand an elephant, you should observe the eye of the elephant. And that's like the tiniest part on an elephant's body, and you would usually not see it. Even if you're watching through a binoculars, you would not really look at the eye. You would look at other things. Okay, how much of grass is it plucking? How much of kicking is it doing with its leg? Because we are tuned to look at, large movements. And that is what we think, like how I'm shaking and using my hands. We think that is what is showing behavior. But actually the subtle behaviors, which is sort of a behavioral response that happens even before a morphological response, in terms of anatomical response, in terms of movement that happens initial responses in the brain, in the mind, right? And that is something that you can apparently see in the eyes of the elephant, because if it gets getting angry, they'll start rolling its eyes, and then if it's calm, the eyes will be relaxed, so you can watch if it's attentive, the eyes will be looking here and there. So they said, you watch the eye of the animal before you go and look at other anatomical things that are moving around, which are a sort of a lagged response to what they are doing. And that was fascinating for me. Then that from the time I've started looking at the eye of the animal, it's been a completely different world. It's like getting into the mind of the elephant. And it's like the gateway to its mind, because the eyes do tell a lot. And they said, other interesting feature they said was, why don't you look at the face of the elephant? Because when it's angry, apparently the face is all stiff. And when it's relaxed and it's calm, the face is more relaxed. You see more wrinkles on the face and all of that. Observe the trunk. If it's relaxed, it's very loose. The trunk is on the ground. It's coiled up. It's on the ground. So things like these, I sort of was able to learn from people who were really close with the elephants, and they knew them as individuals. And so that learning that started when I was 14 years old, 20 years ago, sort of has moved. And I hope I've been able to sort of develop on that and try and understand more. Now, when it comes to anthropomorphism, again, like I said, if I only look at frequency and things like that, I might lose and miss out on a lot of the things that the elephants are quite capable of doing. But because I don't want to be subjective, or I want to be objective in the way that I know what objectivity is, I lose out on a lot of the behaviors that the elephants might actually be showing. And in fact, I'll not be giving them due respect in that sense. I'll not be giving them due credit for the behaviors that they can display, and I'm making it more trivial and saying, okay, these are elephants who can only do this. From our understanding of elephants are animals in that larger group. But we do know elephants are highly intelligent. They're cognitively extremely superior, and all of these. So when you're dealing with a species who we know to a certain extent that they are intelligent, they have long memories, they have experiences that they gather, and all of this, it becomes important for us to sort of also move and modify ourselves a bit, adapt to it, and then try and think of what elephants are doing. One of the very simple examples I'll give you is, very often, and as you know, I study elephants in human-dominated areas. So there's a lot of interaction between people and elephants that happen most of the time. And very often when the elephant picks its trunk up in the air and it starts sniffing, a usual response by the crowd is, oh, look, the elephant is saluting. It picked up its trunk and it's saluting. It's respecting us. But the actual thing that's happening there is the elephant is picking up its trunk and trying to pick up the scent of where the humans are. And the next movement of the elephant could be, it could either charge at you or it could move away from that place. So knowing these behaviors from an animal's point of view is very, very important. Not just for researchers who are writing down, noting down, observing what's happening, but for the communities who live alongside elephants. A lot of the people do still have very close affiliations of, and these are not necessarily people who are living alongside elephants, but these are urban folks, peri-urban folks who go and get to see elephants, or elephants are coming to their areas and they are getting to know elephants. So their understanding of that animal is not as nuanced as people who live with elephants. And so there is a lot of sort of information gap there, and something that we need to sort of bridge. The other way we are trying to make sure that values and other ideas are not imposed on an elephant is, I don't know if you've noticed, but most of the elephant, in fact, all the elephants that we have named as individuals have been given elvish names. So they are straight out of Tolkien's Sindarin and elvish mythical language. And only a few of us know what the meaning of this word is. So if I say Meldir, people around will not know what Meldir is. But if I say, this is Sri Ganesh, or if I say this is Ranga or Rowdy Ranga or whatever, people immediately impose, and project values. And we have already, by giving that name, projected our values onto it. We've never treated the elephant for what it is, but we've sort of treated it as part of our ecosystem, where we think we are on top, and then the elephants come so we can name them the way we want, depending on what values we want to impose on them. And that can backfire, because once you name an elephant in a certain way, people will assume that its behavior is also related to that name. And then things go bad. Yeah. So these are, one is the behavior, the other one is our behavior of naming the elephant itself, which we have sort of tried to be very cautious with when it comes to anthropomorphizing. But like I said, a bit of subjectivity helps. It is very important, I think, while trying to be as objective as possible.
Yeah, and it seems like there's this whole branch of knowledge that objectivity is sacrificing on its altar of trying to count animals and stop it at just that. And you've so eloquently illustrated that whole breadth of knowledge, the knowledge of the mahouts, the knowledge of people who live with the landscape, and your values that you project onto the animal. I just want to bring us back to this one thing that you mentioned, which was the information asymmetry between the people who live with the animal and, say, you or the mahouts who have lived with the animals or know the animals better. So so scientific papers don't end up reaching all of these people, or going people are not going to find out about what you just said about the behavior, about the trunk.
No.
So do you foresee a certain paradigm where you share all of this knowledge to the public in gray literature in some forms, or do you think this has already happened because there is gray literature in the past in historical and religious texts as well, and oral traditions as well? Are you documenting it? Can you just speak to that?
Thanks, Akshay. That's wonderful again. I mean, yes, completely acknowledging the historical, indigenous, local traditions that do exist with the mahouts, for example, or with the local communities who have lived alongside elephants. It is fascinating, and the kind of knowledge they have is incredible because, like I said again, those nuances and the fineness of behavior and all of that doesn't come without actually having lived with these animals, because that's the only way you'll pick up, because you're smelling them all the time, you're feeling them all the time, you're interacting with them all the time, and that's the best way to learn. And very often, we have a lot of the mahout kids who don't go to school, and I've completely come to terms with it, because why would a kid want to go and sit in a math class when he can actually be with a bull elephant or a female elephant, playing around with it, giving it a bath? So the learning that comes from just spending more time with an animal is so much important, so much important. And this is the same learning that a lot of the local communities, especially the farmers, have with the elephants. And in fact, I'll tell you, a lot of the elephants that I study also go into, crop fields. They move across villages, they move across peri-urban areas. Quite recently, peri-urban areas, but they've been moving around in the village areas, rural areas for a long time. And when we go and meet the farmers who are visited by these elephants, they often say that, look, don't tell me about conflict with elephants. I have lived conflict, and I live it even today. So you don't have to tell me about conflict. And I completely understand, And I respect that very much, because their knowledge of conflict is much more than what an academician or a conservation practitioner can bring in, unless you spent a long time in that area. Because, like I said, there are individual elephants, there are individual farmers, and most of these conflict measures are case specific. And so we cannot sort of take something we have learned from one place and try to impose it in another place. It may or may not work. But very interestingly, when we were speaking to the farmers, they said, the other day I was sitting on a machan, on a treetop, guarding my crops, but the elephant somehow noticed me, although I was sitting 20 feet high up in the tree, and I was not making any noise. I didn't shine a torch, nothing of that sort, but the elephant knew where I was sitting. So I said, but elephants can pick up your scent from as far as maybe a kilometer if the wind is in the right direction. That is something that they were very fascinated with. They said, oh, this is something that we don't know about elephants. Now I realize how this elephant could find out that I was sitting on a tree. Now I'll be more careful. And we realized then that the farmers know interacting with the elephants in a certain setting. Either when the elephants come to their crop fields and they chase them, or they feed on their crops or whatever, or when the farmers take their livestock into areas that are within forests where elephants largely rest and stay around during the day, where they have to shoo away the elephant to ensure that the livestock can graze in peace and farmers can come back safely. So this is the interaction, and the limitation is that they have not seen the elephant 24/7. They've probably seen the elephant at night mostly, or when they go for grazing. So they don't know half the story of the elephant, although they are very knowledgeable about the other half. The morning, the day is missing in their knowledge of what the elephant does. And so when we started talking about what elephants do inside the forest, when they're not necessarily in your crop fields, when they're not necessarily feeding on crops or moving through across highways and things, what are they doing? What is their social system like? How do they take decisions of where to go, what to feed on? Why do we think elephants might be coming out and preferring the crops that you're growing and not necessarily all the time feeding inside the forest? Now, these are things that interest the farmers. They want to know more, because now they feel empowered in some sense, because if somebody comes and tells them that, look, the elephants are coming out because you're growing crops or because you have a lot of water outside, then they can still say, no, look, we understand why the elephants are coming out, and this is not necessarily only because I'm growing crops, but because there are other things that are happening inside the forest too. It's not just limited. And one of those things that could be happening inside the forest is also cattle grazing itself, which they come to realize. And so the farmers then talk to one another. It's some sort of a peer-to-peer pressure, where they start talking to each other and say, look, because of your actions, there is a tragedy in the commons that is happening. If I am taking my livestock into the forest and I open the small trench that has been built for an elephant, not that the trench will keep the elephant out, but the small trench, if I fill it up and I take my livestock, I come back in the evening with my livestock, but I don't open up that trench again, then the elephants are easily going to walk through and come into the village. These are simple things that they are now able to identify and talk to the other farmers and say, your actions may have consequences, which are not necessarily desired in our village. So would you work towards making your lifestyle more compatible with the elephant use of the area? And that's something that we're working on now, in fact. And we work with individual farmers, we work with villages, and we work with individual farmers within those villages. Maybe they can form a group, but we're very happy working with even individual farmer and a single crop field, because we bring in the knowledge of the individual elephant that we have studied now for a long time. So it's always about knowing that individual elephant and understanding that individual farmer and knowing where they actually come in contact or friction. Where is the friction in the lives of these two, the elephant and the people, and can we minimize that friction by using alternate methods? So that's really the focus. And like you very aptly said, the papers will just sit here, right? A lot of the things that we write, even the books that we read, that we write, they'll just sit here with us. And maybe they'll be read by people who are knowledgeable, who can read and write. What works really, at least what has worked for us really with the local communities that we work with, is interaction on a regular basis. So just that association and building that relationship is so vital. We've learned that once they sort of accept you, then they open up the doors so well, and they let you into their lives, into their societies, into their communities. And that's when real work can begin, where we can talk about the elephant without them considering us as an outsider, but as someone who lives along with them, someone who understands them, and someone who's also probably lived to a certain extent with the elephant, so that they can bring that knowledge in. And once it's a collaborative effort, it's 24 by 7 knowledge that is sitting there. So collaboratively, we can really look at an elephant and say, what is this elephant doing? Why is it using a certain path? What best can we do to allow it to use these paths, but without harming the property or the crops or the lives of people who live alongside these elephants? So that's possible, but like I said, takes a lot of time.
Yeah, that's just like vindication on so many levels, because interestingly, one of the things that Elinor Ostrom said in her Nobel Prize winning work on the tragedy of commons is averting information asymmetry is one of the key factors to not having the tragedy of commons happen. So this seems to be a classic case of how you're going the extra mile to reduce asymmetry, and not just in knowledge that, say, researchers would perceive, or say just the local communities would perceive, but both. And I guess an interesting link to this, to give context to our listeners, is this incredible Al Jazeera documentary on work that the Nature Conservation Foundation has been doing in Hassan and successfully in Valparai, where it shows visually what you just described of the kind of contact.
Right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
And also, I think it's wonderful that you spoke to us a little bit about the mind of an elephant, and the fact that observing and spending that much time with individual elephants can give you so much insight, especially when you open your own mind as a researcher a little bit to bits of subjectivity that actually add to your science rather than remove from it. And I think we also, like you were saying, our fear of subjectivity and this larger goal of wanting to remain a completely objective scientist actually does blind us sometimes from what is very plain to see. Now, I remember reading in a Carl Safina book about long-term behavior studies, about how there was a researcher who wanted to be objective to the extent that he said, I have no evidence to prove that this elephant is any different from this bush. So definitely there is some mismatch there, and the fact that we are also long-lived mammals who have evolved along similar timelines. We already just evolutionarily share so much with elephant that it would be wrong to disregard what we already know instinctively as people and what we may observe. but it's also nice that you're now working with people to fill in some of those knowledge gaps and those misinterpretations of behavior. So just like you said with the trunk, in my own time in field watching monkeys, I found that when a monkey bares its teeth, sometimes people thought that they were smiling at them, but for a monkey, that's actually a sign of a warning, or
Right.
and that could get them into trouble because they
Right.
thought that, oh, the monkey is being very amiable and sociable, and but
Yeah.
actually, they could end up getting hurt. So I think it's very nice that you've put those two things together. So, but that also brings me to ask you about how different it is to be a behavioral ecologist, from say somebody who is counting animals or studying their home ranges, and those kind of things. While that's also very important for the larger wealth of ecological studies, so what is it about behavior that is so important and makes it so unique?
Well, I think behavior is the basic fabric of any of the social beings, at least, because without behavior, I think we are very close to sort of being machines. And behavior is really the one that tells us what we are. So you could sort of judge someone from their behavior. You could value someone because of their behavior. So behavior sort of is a link to so much more between two beings. Because how you behave with the other person really matters. Whether the person is going to come back and talk to you the next time or not. As simple as that. So it's I think a very essential and a basic fabric in life. And for me, behavior was really the aspect which brought me closest to knowing what the elephant might be thinking on. Thinking is a big word. Might be doing or might want to do. I think it's the closest. I won't say this is what the elephant is doing and what it wants to do. Like the famous essay by Thomas Nagel, "What is it like to be a bat?" You'll never be able to know what is it like to be an elephant. I'll never be able to know what is it like to be an elephant. I can only try and get as close as possible to what an elephant might be thinking. And this, I think, is something that can be picked up, and we can get close to this aspect through behavior. Because firstly, I think behavior for me is really a bottom-up approach where you sit and observe the animal and try and understand what it is doing, rather than a top-down approach where you are doing something to the animal and then trying to see how the animal behaves. Although there are experimental, behavioral studies, and there are, behavioral ecology, which is really about being in the wild and trying to understand what the animals are doing, without necessarily tampering or with their behavior or disturbing them. But again, going back to Rana and his famous paper, "Ecology Proposes, Behavior Disposes." It's so true. It's so true. So the ecology might be saying that the elephant might do a certain thing. We had a classic case, of 5 or 6 elephants who were in an area of about 500,000 square kilometers of forest. And everyone expected that they could probably be inside the forest, happily feeding on the natural vegetation. But they decided that they wanted to come and feed on banana or ragi and things like that. So the ecology might suggest that, okay, there's 500 square kilometers of really good forest. The elephants might be happy living there. But the behavior says, no, I don't want to feed on that. I'll feed on something else as well. So in that sense, behavior is really great because it happens for me at microevolutionary scales. So although long-term evolution takes a lot of time, but cultural evolution doesn't take a lot of time. And for me, that's fascinating because animals can pick up, especially elephants, can pick up the behavior, the changes that are happening in their landscape, in their environmental settings, in the anthropogenic settings that are around them, and they can respond. And this can happen quickly, and it can also, I think, be passed on to other individual elephants very quickly because, again, of the behavior of the elephant. And it's a social being. And so that fascinated me as to what could be happening to the lives of these individuals and these elephants, given our current situation. objectivity is absolutely important. We need to try and move away from trying to spin stories around what is happening, be it emotional stories or be it very sort of documentary sort of stories where you state the fact and say what is happening. But there is a middle path, I think, where knowledge can sort of coexist with uh, what people feel or what elephants feel and those emotions. And as long as we don't sacrifice one over the other, I think it's possible that we can have that balance. And that I've seen is much more helpful to the elephants and to the conservation and to the people than being at either extremes. And I must tell you at this point that I really didn't have any idea of working with people because I'm very antisocial in that sense. I'm not very comfortable around a lot of people. And this was very clear for me because I wouldn't go and attend family functions. I wouldn't go and attend a lot of these, and I'd be called as he doesn't come. So, but I didn't realize that I was generally like that, and I would rather spend time with the animals than with people because I found animals more interesting than people, to be very honest. And and I didn't have an idea of working with the communities. So my idea was I'll follow these individual elephants. In fact, I remember going to Rana and saying, Rana, for my PhD, do you think I can study this one individual elephant for 5 years? So he was happy and shocked at the same time. He said, I mean, you know how Rana is, so he won't discourage you. And he's fascinated by individuals as well. So we sort of were on the same page on that aspect. But then he said, but your PhD thesis will also be evaluated by a whole lot of people who may not have the same idea as you have. And that the behavior of the elephant changes over time. So if you don't capture the variability in this behavior, you'll never be able to say anything about this individual, and it'll always be about this individual and nothing else. So that made sense. And I said, okay, now I'm going to study a larger population, but as individuals, and see. It so happened that a lot of these individuals walked across human use areas. They would come into these crop fields. They would interact with other people. And so it became essential for me to also interact with those people who these elephants interacted with. That's how I really got into talking to people. Otherwise, I would have been very happy being in, deep inside that jungle in Bandipur that Akshay has behind him, and happy watching elephants. That's what I would want to do. But then the elephants brought me to what I'm doing now. So I blame the elephants completely for what's happening. But I don't know if I answered your question in between all of this.
You did. I think, you really gave us an insight into why behavior itself is so crucial, not just for the science of it all and the potential conservation implications of studying these minute behaviors, but also for your journey as a researcher. And I think also being able to watch the animal you're studying that closely and regularly keeps you motivated, right? I mean, there's a lot of us have gotten into this field out of love for animals or because of childhood experiences with it, and it's just so rewarding to be able to sit and watch this creature that you're in such awe of for so long.
But Ishika, I must tell you also that it gets very tough at times. Because and also because the kind of individuals I deal with, it's like dealing with individuals who always want to take risk in their lives. They know nothing else but then take risks. So if you have to manage, not manage necessarily, but if you have to live with them, it's very difficult. It's taxing because someday you'll get and you get calls all the time, midnight. I've had calls from farmers, from forest department staff saying this elephant has come here. What should we do? So it's like constantly living their lives, and their lives are super hectic and super adventurous in that sense. So, and I can't keep up with that. It's one person trying to also look at the lives of 60, 70 bulls, the male elephants that I observe especially, and a lot of these males take, I would say, unnecessary risks and get themselves into trouble all the time, and it's not nice because they also get injured, they get killed, they get shot at, they end up killing people, all sorts of things happen, and it gets to you after some time. And I must tell you, We were working with a group of foresters, forest watchers, who were trying to move the elephants away from a peri-urban area. And they'd gotten really close to high human density habitats, and they had no option but to move them. And you could not move them during the day because they would just stand in a place and people would be around, and so it would be very risky. So they would wait till evening and nightfall actually, and the whole thing would happen at night. And imagine going behind 12 bulls at night with torches on foot. The elephants, you can't see them; they're very silent. If they want to move quickly, they can move quickly. You're walking across landscape where you don't know where the ditch is, where the electricity is, where canal is, where the road is. You're just walking where the elephant is walking. And so it can get to you after a while. And after many days and months of this, we were all sort of sleeping in a dormitory in a local in a village. And suddenly one of the a person who was with us woke up screaming. And we all woke up and we said, so what happened? What happened? Are you okay? Is everything fine? So he said, I had a nightmare. And the nightmare was basically his family was going on a bullock cart, and an elephant had held the bullock cart from behind with its trunk. And the family could not move, and his wife and kids were there in that bullock cart. And so he was petrified in the dream, and he screamed and woke up. So it gets to you after a while because you're going behind these elephants, you know they potentially can actually injure or harm you. And it's not nice to go behind them at night because they want to do their own thing. And we are trying to do whatever we think is right for us and not for them, or even for them. But it doesn't always match, and it gets very intense. You imagine heightened senses of trying to see in the dark, trying to hear that rustle that happens, or the twig that breaks, or the rumble of that elephant, or the dung dropping from the elephant. You constantly on high alert, and that can get to your mind. So behavior in that sense has both. It's not like an ecological survey where you can go note down signs, note down quadrats. You can do it systematically, you can do it really well, and it fits really well with a model that you may want to work on, and it works well. Behavior is so much more dynamic, and there's so much room for errors. And the errors not in terms necessarily of statistical and mathematical computing errors, but errors that can potentially be life or death. Where you have to be very careful, and calculated risks is what we take most of the time. So my mom would call me every day, morning once to find out if I survived the night, and evening once to find out if I survived the morning, survived the day. Wow. So this would happen for some time. After that, it all died down because they were like, okay, we can't do much. He's going to be here anyways with the elephants, so might as well let go.
This was with the forest department, is it? Were you?
It was with the forest department. It was with local communities, because a lot of the farmers, they take it upon themselves to make sure that the crops are protected and they're not damaged. So they end up doing things like going behind the elephant at night, which is very dangerous.
Yeah, I think that way, the risks associated for just the research itself when it comes to elephants is a lot more magnified than anything I've experienced in following the monkeys and watching them. And I think that's interesting to hear that from your experiences, because when you think of going and collecting behavioral data, you don't always consider many of these risks that are associated with it, or the fact that you're actually living the life of an elephant rather than just following an elephant. I think that's a very important distinction. And if I could also just ask you, for our listeners, to explain a little bit about how you actually collect behavioral data. What does that entail? How when you're out at night following the elephants, or observing what they're doing, what are you noting down, and how exactly does that process pan out?
So the days differ, and it's not the same thing, and it's not possible humanly to sort of keep that going for months and years of tracking the elephant and following it. So we have tried various other things of studying behavior, but the most often followed practice is to sit and observe elephants, and this is where again local knowledge of how these elephants move come in so handy, because what we do is initially when we go to the forest or in a human use area and we pick up tracks of the elephants, the fresh tracks, and that's where we park our vehicle and we start tracking those elephants on foot, and we might catch up with them sometimes in a few minutes, sometimes hours, and then once we know where these elephants are, we always sort of maintain a safe distance of 100 meters or something, so that elephants are not really disturbed by our presence, because they can pick up the scent quite easily. And then we discuss, whoever it is, me and my partner, who will be the forest staff or the local community member or other colleagues of mine. If we know the area well, we discuss and say, okay, now the elephants are here. Where would be the best location for us to sit safely without disturbing the elephant, so that we can observe them for long periods of time? And the people who've worked in this area know the landscape so well that they know that there is that bande over there, that's that rock over there. We can go and sit there. The elephants will slowly move. That's what we end up doing mostly. Just sit and observe peacefully. The only disadvantage of that is, when we start tracking the elephants at 5, 6 in the morning, we can observe them till about 11. And by 11 o'clock till about 2 o'clock, they go into some shade of a tree and they sleep. Well, you're left on a boulder in hot sun, just sitting there. So, and you don't want to go away because you don't want to miss what is happening if the elephant comes out or whatever. So you end up sitting there on that boulder watching elephants sleep. So again, they wake up around 3-ish and they start feeding. And if we are inside a protected area, we leave by about 5:30, 5:45, so that we are out of the protected area by 6, because that's the rules of the forest department. They don't want anybody to be inside the forest limits after 6 p.m. But we are in human use areas where we get to spend more time with the elephants. Then we continue our watch till about 7 in the evening, and then we come and have dinner. And by about 9 or 10, we're back in the field and trying to observe elephants. And we don't always track elephants at night. We know that it is very, very risky. We did this initially. I did this initially also when I started in my master's and also during my PhD, the initial years, because it was important to understand how they were moving and how these decisions were being taken, and especially to look at who they were associating with at night and if that was different from during the day. So there were certain things that were required, and so I was following them at night along with the forest staff and the local community members. And this was completely in human use areas. So this was across agricultural fields, this was across villages, highways and things like that. And so we do that till about 2 or 3 in the morning and we return, because by around 12, 1 o'clock, you've lost the elephant. They would have gone. And you don't know where they are, and it's too risky to go behind them, and the dew is coming and the visibility is reducing and all of that is happening. 3 or 4 o'clock we return, and we go back at around 6 o'clock back to the location where we had last seen the elephants, and then we track back, and by 6:37 we are again with the elephants. So that's really the routine when we are doing follows of elephants, direct behavioral observations of these elephants, and we try and observe them for about 3 hours at least a day, full 3 hours at least a day. Well, then we, because of the sort of work that we were doing, especially at night and things, we've had to adapt, and we started using camera traps, because we could put up these camera traps where elephants would sleep in the afternoon, so we would still get recordings of what's happening in the life of an elephant without us necessarily disturbing them. We could put up camera traps once we got to know where they move around along the paths that the elephants use at night. So we at least know where these elephants are moving and which location to sort of get these elephant photographs. so that we at least know who's associating with whom. So we didn't necessarily have to follow them because we were not doing any foraging observations then, we were looking at associates. So there are ways in which you can reduce the risks both to the elephant and to the people involved by using some of these technologies. Camera traps, that sense, are extremely helpful. There are other ways of doing it. Radio collaring is something that we've been wanting to do, but we've not done it. So that's something that will again give you a lot of information of what the animal is doing. But none of it replaces direct observations of elephants, because you need to know what these elephants are doing and how they are behaving with one another. And it's very hard to replace the human from it, even if we are using camera traps. So yeah, so basically the day involves this, with short breaks for lunch. Even during lunch breaks, if there are two observers, then we switch who's observing which elephant, and we end up doing all these technical things of scan sampling and focal animal sampling and ad libitum sampling. So a lot of these just behavioral observations of elephants in as structured a way as possible. Yeah, so that's basically a day's work. A lot of times people think that we are like the Pied Pipers of elephants, because we follow the elephants and reach a village, but the villagers think that we have actually brought the elephants there. So I would say we haven't really had any sort of dangerous encounters with elephants, touch wood, and it's been great. Also because I think we maintain a very safe distance from these elephants. But we've had people gherowing us and saying, "Oh, you brought the elephants." And a lot of the camera traps we've lost is actually more for people than elephants in our landscape. So elephants are there, but then they don't do much damage.
You mentioned this is probably the least consequential bit of what you just said, but I think our listeners will be interested. What do you guys have for lunch in the field? You literally have 3 hours to sleep.
Oh, I must tell you this. This is fascinating. Firstly, me and the entire group of people I work with are foodies. We love food. And we love trying food which is local, which is cooked in some shack, in some place. So while we are following elephants, while elephants are mapping their 4-H sites, we also map our 4-H sites very well. So that's the first thing we do. Right? Which shack is open at what time? Which hotel is open at what time? What do they cook? All of this. And now in that entire area of 10,000 square kilometers, we actually planning to do a food map for people who are using this area to where to go and eat what, because these are really local, small places where lovely food is prepared. Lovely food. Or I don't know if we find it lovely after those 3 hours of session of following elephants or whatever. The food is great, and we go and eat. What has been really helpful is is moving from one village to another following elephants. And when we go to the neighboring village, we stop and halt there in someone's house on the portico, in the porch or whatever, and we stay there. And people are really kind and they give us food. So we end up eating a lot of ragi balls, a lot of upsaro khara, a lot of sabji. If you go on some festival day, you end up either eating some obbattu or something like that, which is special sweet that has been made, or you end up eating mutton or mutton curry with ragi balls or something like that. So those are special days. So food has been great. And like I said, we've mapped out all of this. Sometimes we also do carry our food, especially over the last 5 months. We decided that we should carry our own food, and so that we don't sort of expose whoever we meet for longer periods of time. Having food is using their plate, sitting in that porch, having to have a dialogue with the person who's giving you food and all of that. So we said we're going to really reduce on that. So we carry dabba. A lot of times it's food that's been prepared the previous day. So we have in mind that, okay, tomorrow we are leaving, so we're packing dabba and going. So we prepare something that can be taken for the next day. A lot of times it's just packing buns with a lot of eggs or some cucumber and things like that to make sandwiches. Otherwise, we prefer eating locally. So home cooked food is avoided when you're actually on field, and I'm sure the people who I work with agree with me on this.
We definitely do in our own field experience. I guess this is interesting because you gave us the entire human side of the data collection process, which is amazing, and which, like we discussed before the recording, it's not there in the method section of your paper. We don't know the Upsaru Ragi ball.
I don't want my paper to be rejected. Put all
Yeah. But speaking of papers, you had a recent publication from your PhD in Nature Scientific Reports. This incredible piece of work, which over a long period of time, I'm sure. And the crux, I might be paraphrasing now, of your study was looking at how males typically in the traditional understanding of elephants, as if you're in school and you read something on an encyclopedia or Wikipedia website, you're like, oh, elephants are matriarchal, and the herds are usually female herds, and the young males disperse and live solitary.
Yeah.
But you found that it was not the case in urban landscapes and peri-urban landscapes. My question is, I mean, please do tell us more about that. This is fascinating, and you've discovered, in some sense, like you mentioned previously, cultural evolution of behavior. But this also flies in the face of traditional scientific thinking, and we know that science works in paradigms, and there's lots of people push back against new ideas and thoughts. So how did you deal with that, and have you had to, or are you still grappling with that from the scientific community?
Yeah, thanks, Akshay. I mean, again, a very interesting question. I love the way you folks are sort of framing this in the larger context of what's happening, and you're right. And this immediately brings to my mind, Thomas Kuhn's the idea of scientific revolution, of how certain ideas are new, but it takes a long time for it to get, in some sense, mainstreamed. And it's true with me, with the elephants I study, in fact. And in fact, if I simply do a box plot of the amount of time spent feeding by elephants across the landscape, both inside the forest and outside, some of them will be outliers. And very often what we do is, the first thing we do is cull the outliers, right, from the data and say, oh, this is creating noise, I want to take these off. But very interestingly, these outliers were the individuals I ended up studying. Because like I said, they were showing behavior which was very different from what the others were. And I thought, okay, this is fascinating. And because these are elephants and they can pass on this information really quickly in the population, I would be really interested in knowing what's happening here with these outliers. And so I started not with a hypothesis. I really didn't start with a hypothesis. And that was a little dangerous because you're writing a thesis and you don't have a hypothesis. You have some natural history observation and a hunch that you're following. Because I used to see these male elephants hang around together in smaller groups, and they would disappear for many months in a year from an area that I was studying inside the forest. And I always wondered where they were going. Until one fine day, I figured that yes, they were going into a largely human use area and staying in fragmented forest patches there for a long time, and they would come back into the forested landscape. And that fascinated me. And these happened to be these outliers in that box plot. And so I said, I really want to look at what is happening. And that was a huge risk that I managed to take and convince Rana, my guide, and said, Rana, this is something that's very interesting that's happening. And knowing him, he jumped on board. And a lot of other people, Srinivas Vaidyanathan, Professor Raman Sukumar, they were all, this is brilliant. This is something interesting that's happening. Let's try at a landscape level, because Sarashini comes from a landscape approach. Professor Sukumar, having studied elephants for many, many decades, he had sort of written about, these all-male group formation during crop raiding periods, how these bulls come together and they split up and go back, from his observations in the 80s, late 70s and 80s. and so sort of all of this came together, and we decided, okay, I had a community of people who were encouraging. Otherwise, it would not have been possible. If even one of them would have said, I think today that it might be risky for your PhD. I don't know if you'll get enough data. So I don't know what I would have done. But all of them said, this is fantastic. Let's try and see what's happening. So half my thesis was really a journey of discovery. It was not with hypothesis. It was just trying to see if this natural history observation can have more evidence on field. Are there males who are associating with one another? Do we really have bull groups? And for a long time, I think people have been seeing these bull groups. It's just that they have been recorded as herds, because a lot of the males don't have tusks in this landscape. And so they've been recorded as females. And so immediately, any individual who's younger or smaller than the older individual without tusks becomes the calf or the juvenile. So it's interpreted as a herd. So even if you ask people, they'll be like, yeah, herd. A herd had come here. They've lost their way and come. So that was the other one. They've lost their way and come. So my interest was, okay, is this really a herd? Are these female elephants? The second one was, have they really lost their way and come here? So those are the two sort of cues that I picked up my study on, and observed more and more of these videos that people had taken, the photographs that people had taken. I started collecting videos. I started going to places where these photographs had been taken, started talking to people. And then I started to meet some of these elephants when they came out. And the more and more I saw them, I realized that these were all males. There was not a single female in those groups. And these groups could go up to 25 in number. Those were huge. They had not been recorded previously. So the largest group size recorded was somewhere around 4 or 5 animals coming together and leaving. And the other aspect was that these bulls were not going anywhere. They were with one another, and they continued to be with one another for a considerable period of time. And only when these older bulls came into must, they would leave this group of bulls and they would go into the forested area. And that's when I used to see them. And most of the time when I saw them, they were in must. And so all of that connected and it started making sense. So it was one group. After that, we found another. After that, we found another. We found 4 groups at the end of this. And that's when we said, okay, something really interesting has happened in this landscape. And going back to what we were discussing earlier, there's so much history to all of this. And what I am looking at is just a snapshot. And this could be the complete modification, the sociality that has happened in the life of these elephants, because now they have found a new sociality in terms of the bull group, to the individual elephant, whose behavioral response depends so much on the history of its interaction with something, be it people, be it the landscape, be it other individuals. In fact, just as a digression, a lot of times people end up saying this elephant is very aggressive, it's charging. And people tend to look at that snapshot and say, it charged me, and so it is aggressive. But a lot of us don't seem to understand that that elephant has had its night, its previous day, its morning even, where the individual has had experiences. It could be either being chased in a crop field, being shot at by someone, having to run off the road because there's a truck coming. I've had a fight with another individual, had a disagreement with another elephant. All of this is in the mind of that elephant when it interacts with us. So it's never what the immediate response you see. There's so much of history to what that elephant has gone through for, and the reason why it's behaving a certain way. So unless you give these elephants that time and give these individuals that time to show behaviors, we'll never be able to capture actually what the elephant is sort of going through. And that's what we did with the bull groups. We said, okay, let's observe them now for the longer time. And that's when my hypotheses came. And I said, okay, there are bulls. These are bulls of a certain age class. When they're coming into must, they're leaving the group and they're going. And they seem to be in amazing body condition. So can I sort of think of why this might be happening? And so we studied this as objectively as possible. Once we had got the natural observations, we studied this as objectively as possible, looked at associations between these individuals, looked at interactions between these individuals, Simple things like what is association, for example. So we looked at things like if an elephant turns to a certain direction, if the other elephants also follow this, then we know that they're associating. If the elephant is within one animal body distance of the other, because the calf and the mother we know associate all the time, and they are within one animal body length of each other. And so if these bulls are also doing the same, then we know that they are associating. But we ended up finding so much more than just associations, to the level where we started observing adult bull elephants playing with one another, building bonds with one another. And this is something we had not known. I mean, I'll someday maybe I can show you a video of how one of the older bulls, who is a long-term associate, who was a long-term associate of another older bull, uh, were interacting. And they were moving along the path, and this older bull lies down in front of the other adult. And the other adult starts climbing on it like the calves do and started poking it. And so they had this whole session of play, which is what you see with calves. And we had limited it only to calves, maybe to females and calves, maybe to females with females. But I think our idea of males was such that they were either competing with one another, or they were feeding and doing what they wanted to. They were either there to breed, or they were there to feed. Only two. We had, I think, lost the idea of sociality in males and how important this could be for them. And the human use area sort of provided a setting for that, where I think it was more pronounced than anywhere else. Because now they had each other to watch out for and nobody else. It was them or it was the people. And people were not there to watch out for them. And they didn't have any other elephants to watch out for them. So they had to come together, even if they would compete for resources during a later period of their time. But they had to learn to associate and stay together in order to survive better in this landscape. And that's how this whole thing happened. And the technical part is in the paper. So this is sort of the background between the paper and the PhD work.
I think it's also very encouraging to hear, from people who've spent so long in the field, that there is still room to discover more and to unearth more that we don't already know. Because I know many people like myself who grew up reading Cynthia Moss's long-term studies on elephants, or Jane Goodall's long-term studies with chimpanzees, and these are these pioneering works where they went in blind and spent their entire lives there and gave so much to those animals, and they were able to inform all of humankind about behaviors and nuances that nobody had any ideas about. And now we have come a long way ever since the start of those pioneering studies. And sometimes it feels like you just have to find a tiny niche or ask the same question in a new landscape in order to even get funding to do something or have a professor interested in your work. And I think it's very encouraging to hear from you that there are still people who support novel work, who support descriptive work, to go in blind and not always have a strong hypothesis, and to be able to still find new things that people didn't know, despite us having been observing elephants for so many years already, for decades. I mean, there are so many people who have studied them, and yet you're finding new things. I think that's truly wonderful.
Yeah, but with a rider, that I have to live with the fact that what I have studied today may not hold true 10 years down the line. So because behavior is so volatile, not volatile, it's so dynamic, it can change. So these bulls may behave differently 10 years down the line, depending on what they're experiencing then and what the landscape around them is then. And so the observing and the studying of these individuals never stops. Because I miss out on that 1 year or 2 years, they may have changed, and I would have missed out on that change. So the long-term studies in that sense, and that's why I think it's risky, and it's important for us to have people around who are encouraging and who can say that. I've had people who said in my CV, I usually end up writing, I'm very interested in learning novel techniques to understand elephants better. So I'd once had a comment by a senior conservationist saying, what more new things are there to learn about elephants? And it shattered me, completely shattered, because for me to hear that, firstly for someone to understand that we probably know everything that we have to know about elephants, um, and for me as a behavioral ecologist who's saying my own PhD may not hold true 5 years down the line, that's a lot of a lot of stress in some sense to take, because someone's saying, yeah, we know everything about elephants, but then we don't. We'll never know everything that we think. We'll never know, because they have a mind of their own, and they will keep doing what they're doing. If we don't keep track of those changes, if we don't observe them and keep learning from them, and we think that we have learned everything and there's nothing else to learn, we'll lose out. We'll really lose out. And this is more important to conservation, I think, than academic research. Because elephants that are today will not behave the same way 10 years down the line. And so a lot of the mitigation measures and things that we have put in place today may not hold true 10 years down the line. And that's why I think for conservation practitioners especially, it's important to be updated about the behavior of animals. Otherwise, our mitigation measures or whatever measures we bring in may be detrimental to the animal than it being useful.
So this actually very well brings me to what I wanted to ask you about your own journey from a researcher and a behavioral ecologist to someone who is very conscious now about the conservation implications of this work. And you seem to have now moved into a space where your research and on-ground efforts, whether it's working with farmers, or others who interact with elephants regularly, that's become it goes hand in hand now for you. From our conversation it seems like that. So what exactly caused this shift? Was there a point in time during your work that you suddenly shifted focus, or has this been a more organic process?
Yeah, so thanks, Ishika. But like I said, the elephants brought me into this. So I didn't plan this at all. So I clearly remember I was tracking one of the bull elephants, and its path was just going out of the forested area all the time. And we then decided, okay, better to get more information on this animal outside the forested area than inside. So we started tracking him outside. And it just brought me to so many actors in that sense: people, infrastructure, large scale projects, um, you name it. I mean, these elephants have met and interacted and have had experiences of their own with all of these roads, railways, electric lines, ditches, canals, angry farmers, people shooting at them, people shouting at them, vehicles, trains, you name it. I mean, water bodies. And most often we would sort of associate water bodies with elephants drinking or playing in that. But some of the elephants that I study, they started using village water bodies as refuge sites. So a complete behavioral shift from what we thought they would use water bodies for. So they showed me a lot more, and they made me meet a lot more people. In that sense, a project that has sort of developed from these studies are very organic, because we deal with all actors, or try to at least, with all actors who these elephants interact with on a regular basis. And so I'm a reluctant conservationist, and I have a very short answer when it comes to conservation, because I've only started experiencing it now, what it is, and what it means to sort of bring in your academic research work into the conservation world and conservation field. And very importantly for me, it has to merge. One has to feed into the other, and that learning has to come from the elephants and no one else. So the elephants are simply top priority. And the reason I started doing conservation was I could see that with a lot of these individuals going into areas, people had started losing tolerance. And these individual elephants would be easily recognized, and they were given names by locals. And there was pressure on the government to remove some of these elephants. And a lot of these elephants, because they are in high risk areas, the risk of mortality is very high. So we had elephants. We lost a number of individuals. I've lost a number of individuals that I have known and I have associated with, but they were dying, and they continue to even today. And that is something that affected me, and that's what probably also made me think that I need to work with communities so that they consider these elephants as their own, and that if we actually work with communities and there are alternative ways of dealing with the elephant in their lives without necessarily involving damage of crops or lives or risking their own lifestyles in that sense, there may be a way out. And so we started working with farmers, trying to see how and what measures they can take, which are not too much of a deviation from their regular normal lives, but just enough to keep that elephant who visits their villages also in mind. And once we started doing that, and we've only started recently, but we've been able to see some changes that are happening. And the first change we hope to see is with the people, because we hope that people can be as adaptable towards the elephants as elephants have been towards people and the changes that we've made in their homes. So we hope that people can accept that elephants, and a lot of people do. It's not that they don't. A lot of the communities who live with elephants, they live with elephants and they don't mind coming and having elephants around. It's just that they don't want the elephants to feed on their crops necessarily, because it's a huge, huge loss of food grains and also livelihood. So we hope that people will be able to respond initially, and they can say that, okay, we'll follow certain practices and lifestyles that are more compatible with the elephant use of the area, at the same time protecting and ensuring our crops are protected and they're not eaten by the elephants. And we hope that this will then make the elephants also respond accordingly. I really hope that the elephants will also realize that certain areas they cannot feed on crops because it is well protected, it's not available to them. And these areas will have to be used for other things, like moving across fallow lands or grazing from patches that are not necessarily where crops are grown, but there is natural vegetation still within these villages. And the hope is that once this sort of friction is reduced between people and they become more compatible with each other's use of the landscape, then there will be lesser of a pressure on authorities to act on the elephant. And the reason we're doing this is also because we understood that the conflict in the area that we study, at least in, is more socio-political than anything to deal with the elephant. So it's really about other things that are impacting people. And elephants happen to be easy targets to blame things on. And they get used in that sense between the power struggles of various actors. And so in some sense, today we are selling mangoes and we are selling ragi, and that has nothing to do with studying an elephant. But we still do it because the communities now know that there is value to what they are doing, which is growing crops without harming these elephants. And if they can understand that, and if they're valued for it, it's not just, and it's all organic crop that they grow. And just because they grow somewhere deep inside the forest, where middlemen, either if they go, they will buy the crops at very low price, or they don't go there at all because it's inaccessible in a lot of cases. The farmers just end up just growing their crops, using their crops for household consumption, and selling very little. And so that whole chain of growing crops and just consuming it is the only thing that they sort of practice while selling it at very low prices. So there is nothing that they're getting as a reward, or their efforts of growing crops alongside elephants, I don't think has been valued. It has not been recognized. And that's the recognition we hope to bring in. So that from a very outsider perspective, this is, and I understand that. But the hope is these farmers can become ambassadors for the elephants. And they can say that, there is a way to live alongside elephants. And at the same time, make your farming and lifestyle more profitable, and to have a better life without the elephant being, the dark cloud that is hovering on their heads all the time. We don't want them to be like the gulls in Asterix, wondering when the sky is going to fall on their head, because the uncertainty is too much for the farmers, and elephant just adds to it, and it doesn't help.
Yeah. Wow, that's some incredible work, and hopefully we'll see some, this story becoming more and more successful, and hearing more of this, and maybe have you another episode for an update on how this is going. Yeah, and
hopefully one of the farmers can come and talk to you.
Yes, that would be incredible. Yes, yeah.
That will be the thing about elephants.
Wow, yeah. That's definitely going in as on our notes of to-do lists to future seasons. You mentioned how some of these, like one of the dark looming clouds that people had, and you mentioned the fact that sometimes you name elephants and people give names as well. And this reminds me of this lecture you gave us, Ishika and I, when we were doing our masters at NCBS a few years ago, where you gave a lecture about the work, and you showed some incredible videos, and you ended the talk with the story of this elephant Ranga, your sort of the most famous elephant from your study, in some sense, if we could say it. And at that point in time, Ranga had been captured, and one would have thought that would have been the worst outcome, but it got worse.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for our listeners, he was captured, and he was then hit by a bus when he was being trained and into captivity, and he didn't survive that accident. Most people don't talk about this, but a lot of the subjects we work with, it could be landscapes, it could be animals, it could be individuals, a species itself, that we get attached to and we lose them. And this can't go in, we can't communicate this in our science communication or talk to people about this in our conservation efforts. How has that been like for you? I mean,
to put it in one simple terms, it's been terrible. One, because these are individuals who, like I said, we've associated with for a long time, and it's very difficult to be really objective about these individuals. After a time when they know your scent and you know their scent, then some sort of a bond is built there, and it's tragic. And what happens a lot of times, like I said, he's also quite detrimental to the elephants with what we're doing. Like I said, one was a name that was given to the elephant, and it's just that he was a very charismatic male elephant. By the way, in our database, he's called Híristor, which in Elvish is Hir is king, Ista is knowledge, and Or is giver. So he was really the bull who was giving a lot of knowledge, information on what was happening around. And I would consider him to be one of these, early explorers of the Asian Elephant Society. He was really a globetrotter, and he and a lot of other elephants who associated with him really showed us what elephants were capable of doing. And what I think they were capable of doing really is that they showed us that they could live alongside humans, and that is something I don't think we could accept. It's not an understanding of the maturity that we showed towards these elephants, because we thought we couldn't survive and exist alongside them. And that's sad on our part, because considering ourselves as, really sophisticated, intelligent, cognitively superior beings, if we are not able to understand what our actions are doing to the animals, it is depressing. But like I said, a lot of these elephants were taking high risks, and they were dying of a number of unnatural causes, electrocution, road hit, by a bus, things like that. People were upset with these elephants, and like I again said, a lot of times the issue is socio-political. It's really not to do with the elephant at all. And when some of these individuals who are charismatic, who are really well known in the landscape by the locals, are around, they become easy targets. They're soft targets because everyone knows this elephant. And very often, I think we don't step back and think that, okay, if this elephant is not moving around because I'm not chasing it, it's probably gotten habituated. And it's probably habituated because it has learned the ways of living alongside us, rather than an elephant who immediately runs when he hears a person's voice, because that elephant is more scared and probably fears humans and is not as habituated as the other individuals are. But what this habituation also does to these individuals is it makes them respond to situations better. So these elephants don't necessarily go about and in fear or in defense. They don't go and kill people necessarily. They are much more calmer. They are much more sophisticated in their own understanding of what people can or cannot do to them. In that sense, the elephants who are deep inside the forest know much little than the elephants who are interacting with people, because these elephants know how to take fences, they know how to cross roads, they know what to avoid and what not to. They know where to go and forage on food which is not natural vegetation. So they have learned a lot more than the elephants who are deep inside forests. And in some sense, they are more culturally evolved than the elephants inside the forest. But this is sort of cultural evolution that humans, we may not want elephants to do, because they will get more habituated, there will be more competition, there will be more interaction, which may result in a lot of conflict. But what we fail to recognize with a lot of these individuals who were in human use areas but were moved out was the importance of these individuals for the elephant society itself. We just thought of it in terms of what might be best for humans, but we never thought what might be the consequences of such actions on elephant society. And I think there are both social costs and individual costs that are involved. Individual cost was very evident because he was a mature adult who was taken into captivity. So the stress and the trauma that these elephants go through is immense. And he finally was killed by a bus on a road. You know, and it's ironic because this bull used to cross 4-lane, 5-lane highways when he was roaming wild, and for him to get knocked down by a bus and in captivity is really sad. It clearly means that he's been taken into a position where he didn't know where he was, or he didn't know how to respond to the situation. He didn't expect or anticipate that a bus might be coming, because it's a completely new environment for this elephant. That is the individual cost for an elephant. And the individuals, for especially bulls, matter in our context, because during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a lot of these mature adults have been poached. We have very few mature adults who are left. And within those mature adults, there's competition to mate again. So there are very few individuals who finally get to breed with the female elephants. And so some of these really well-built individuals become very, very important individuals to the population itself. And that is at the sort of the population scale. But as an individual and its behavior to the population and to the groups that hang around there, I think they play a much larger role. So there's more to the sociality of these individuals than we ever thought there was. Because a lot of the younger males who associate with these older bulls are more experienced of, ranging either in a forested area or a non-forested area. They have a lot to learn from these bulls if they have to survive successfully. And one of the learning also involves how to interact with people. And these older bulls, being much calmer, being more experienced, they know how to avoid people in more way. But a lot of the younger males, because they are immature and they are very scared, they might end up charging people, or they might end up redirecting their aggression towards a cow, towards something else, towards a building, towards a scooter or something else. And all of this is mostly in defense, self-defense, and out of fear. And so these older bulls had a huge role to play in managing the conflict itself in that area. And as humans, we'll not ever be able to manage the elephants. It'll never be possible for us to sort of individually manage elephants. But these older bulls can do that role. And we didn't recognize that with this individual. And that's what sort of saddened me, because for about 6 to 8 months in a year, he would not be in human use areas. He would just be inside the forested landscape. He would just not be outside at all, because he would be in musk and he would be here. And there were other bulls as well who would do the same, but there were other bulls who would completely be in humid areas throughout the year, and they would probably account for more damage to crops than some of these older bulls did. But then, who do you sort of capture and move out, or who's the one who's an easy target? It's usually the older, larger bulls, because they are easily identifiable. Their behavior of being habituated is, mistaken, misunderstood for being adamant, being somebody who you easily cannot move away from your crop field, without understanding the value of this bull. And the other thing we sort of recently finding is that the moment you take away these older, larger bulls, the younger bulls split up into smaller units. And now instead of having these elephants move in one area, you have multiple smaller units moving in different areas. So you also have conflict that has spread in a larger area. So I would suggest, I mean, it's a dicey thing. I mean, what do you do when a whole lot of people are saying we don't want this elephant in this area? Either we involve the communities to a certain period of time, work with these communities to a longer periods of time, so that they're convinced that these elephants can live alongside them. There are certain cases, for example, when young bulls came into Mysore city, you had no other option but to move those elephants out of there. There was no way the elephants could actually stay in the city along with people. So early detection and quick action for certain cases is important. The plan is not to let the conflict go on for 10 years, 15 years, and then try and say, okay, I'll do something now, because it's reached a stage where it's unbearable for people and for the elephant. By that time, the elephant has habituated itself to the area. Now you have very fewer options to what to do with the elephant. So, and even if one decides that the elephant cannot stay in a place, it has to be moved out. What do you do with that elephant becomes another important question. And that is and none of these decisions really help the individual elephant, or in this case, because these happen to be male elephants, the population itself. So we need to be more proactive, I would suggest, in our approach. So early detection, quick action, in some sense helps, because the elephant is also habituating itself to a new environment. So even if something's happened, it knows that it can move out, or it can stay in that area. So before those decisions are made by these elephants, before these associations are formed, before these groups establish themselves, and this goes back to where we started from. You know, most of these cases are ignored because people often end up thinking that these elephants have lost their way and they have ended up here. Elephants never lose their way. They come there, they map that area, they go back with a lot of information, potential information that they can give out to other individuals, and they'll keep coming back to that area if they find that conducive. If they find it non-conducive, they will not come back and visit those areas often. But they do keep doing their recce's because their area has shrunk a lot. They need to find more areas to disperse into and settle in. We're seeing this in a lot of cases with elephants who are completely displaced from their habitat, like in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, who now moved into MP and Maharashtra even. We've seen elephants who are dispersing, who are in the younger age classes, who are moving out and looking into a new area to settle in. Unfortunately, the landscape that they have lived in is no longer as forested as it was during their fathers, mothers, aunts period. It's changed. Now we have a whole group of young ones who for whom conflict is a norm, for whom feeding from crops and being in the forest is a norm. So when we're dealing with individuals like these, we have to be more proactive and more empathetic towards these individuals, because I think we need to understand and keep in our minds at all times that the elephant is behaving the way it is today because of our actions. Otherwise, it would have behaved in a very, very different way. So if there's anyone to blame, I think we should blame ourselves and give the elephant that extra rope, and say, yes, this is what has happened, and we should work together in some sense towards a new ecosystem where we can potentially, there will be trade-offs. There will be certain areas where elephants will never be able to sort of coexist, but there are peacefully. But there are certain other areas where people can definitely put an effort and try, if possible, they can.
Yeah, that's a hopeful note. I have a suggestion, Nishant. You mentioned elephants never get lost. and this flies in the face of this one childhood rhyme in Kannada that you might be familiar with this aane bantu and aane, which is why did it come here, which is illi gyake bantu dari tappi bantu, which is it came here because it got lost. Maybe we can start there with our information asymmetry.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think the elephant lore needs to come from and interestingly, the Mahouts and Kawadis have a lot to say about elephants in their songs. And we recently did something called as a Song of the Mahouts, where they came and actually shared their songs with everyone in Bangalore at Nias. And their understanding of elephants is something that, again, it's a community who has been sort of looked at as people who are there to take care of the elephants and to sort of at times capture other elephants and train them and tame them. But there's so much more to the Mahout and the Kawadi community than just capturing and taming elephants. And if we don't value them for the other aspects of their lives, they'll never think that capturing elephants is the only option for us to survive in that sense. So if I have to have an elephant, and my tribe needs to, my community needs to follow this practice of taming elephants. But there's so much more to those communities as well, and the Mahouts who came here and shared their songs, their lives with us, it was fascinating. I mean, there's so much more. So in that sense, there is a lot more out there to learn, to find, to discover. It's already been found probably, but it's just that we're not aware of it.
Nice. You mentioned the term Kawadi. What can you tell us and our listeners what that is?
Kawadi is a helper for the Mahouts. He's a person who sort of cuts the forage and cleans the elephant and all of that. The Mahouts is the person who really commands the elephant.
So, Nishant, you've told us so much about what directly from your work inspires you and keeps you going, and what your personal drives are there. But we're also interested in knowing what are things that inspire you in general. Who are the people that have inspired you? What are the places that keep you going? Are there any books in particular that you hold close to heart, or any individual animals?
Thanks. I think what inspires me is food. In that sense, I'm like an elephant. So I might be doing a certain work because I know I might have to, lunchtime is coming or something. So the benchmark is really that. The food is going to happen at some point in time, and so I look forward to it. But on a serious note, a lot of people, like I said, elephants are a huge inspiration, because I think through their behavioral adaptability and plasticity and how flexible they are, they're such an inspiration. I mean, I've come to realize that as humans, we are so much more rigid. It takes a lot of time for us to change our habits. But the elephants are always, and probably hence the elephants are always one step ahead of us. And to give you just an anecdote about this, we were working with farmers and around a protected area, and we went to them and they said, we put these light bulbs next to our haystacks, and so looking at the light, the elephants think that there are people around, and so they don't come. So we said, that's brilliant. Is it working? So I said, it's working perfectly fine. It's excellent. So we said, that's fantastic. We made our notes and we said, just having a light around can potentially prevent elephants from coming and feeding on crops. So next year we went to the same set of farmers and we said, so how is it going? Are the elephants still coming or not coming? So they said, no, they've been coming and eating irrespective of the light is on or not. So we said, okay, what do you think happened? So they said, we don't know. The elephants have gotten bolder. So this doesn't work anymore. So we said, okay, this is interesting. So let's now look at it from the elephant's point of view. And so we were observing elephants. And by around 6:30 in the evening, the elephants come and line themselves up alongside the forest. And they're waiting for nightfall, darkness, where they can move out. And by around 7:38, the farmers come out and they burst crackers. And that is to show the elephants that there are people who are actively guarding and there are crackers, so you don't come anywhere close. And interestingly, as soon as those crackers were burst, we saw this group of elephants align themselves in the direction of that cracker. They all aligned themselves. All their heads moved to that side. And they stayed inside still. And we were like, oh my God, what is happening? They were all aligned. Maybe they were alerted that the cracker has come, so they know that they should avoid that area. For the next 2 hours, they pretended that they were feeding. They were really not feeding. They were just picking up grass. They were trying to get at some mimosa pudica plant. They were pushing each other. All of this was happening. And around 10 o'clock, there was a second round of crackers. And as soon as the second round of crackers went off, the elephants, one after the other, moved out of the forest, and they made a beeline towards where the cracker was burst. So we thought, okay, this is phenomenal. What is happening? So we followed them, and then we saw that these elephants would go and the light would be on. There's no farmer after 10:30. The light would be on, and the elephants would go from where the light is. So they are behind the haystack, and they're feeding all the crops from behind, not where the light source is, where the light is shown, but from behind where darkness is. So we went to the farmers and we said, look, what is the practice that you're following? The elephants are doing this. So they said 8 o'clock we come out and burst crackers, thinking that the elephants will know that they're being. Then we go back, have dinner. 10:30 we come and we burst another set of crackers, and after that we go and sleep. So we said elephants have learned, they figured out that your bursting of crackers is actually like a bell. It's like Pavlov's dog, right? So they now know that next set of crackers, once they go out, the coast is clear. No one is there. I can just go and feed. Now you give them an audible cue with a cracker, and you have the light on, so there's a visual cue as well. They hardly have to use their own trunks anymore to pick up where the crop is. So elephants can pick this up and they can learn really quickly. And as humans, we are always one step behind in that sense. So that behavioral adaptability and flexibility is something that I really admire, and elephants have been a huge inspiration. The other people have inspired all of those books, Cynthia Moss, Joyce Poole, Professor Sukumar, Ullas Karant, a whole lot of people whose books I have read, people who have interacted with Rana, Srini, a whole set of people. There are a lot of people, including the farmers and the mahouts and the kawadis. Usually at the end of it, when I have to write acknowledgement in my reports, I end up saying, due to the lack of space, I am only mentioning the designation of these people, not individual names. So it goes to something like 250 field staff, 50 forest rangers, because these elephants range in a very, very large area. And so I don't even have a study area in that sense. I only have study individuals. And so wherever these individuals go, I have to go there. And so I end up meeting so many people in all of this that it becomes a journey of exciting interactions, talking to people, talking about this elephant to people. It's also fascinating for them to see that someone has walked all the way from here following this elephant and has come here. So there must be something more to just following and photographing elephants. So that's where conversations build, and hopefully conservation can also sort of happen in this.
Oh, man, this has been such an incredible journey for you. I mean, even just hearing about the different elephants, and like you said, just hundreds of people have contributed in many ways to obtaining this wealth of knowledge and also working towards conserving them. So this has actually been such an incredible conversation for Akshay and me also, because we went into this already knowing that it's going to be very exciting to talk to you, but you've given us so much warmth in this conversation, and a huge part of me wishes we didn't have to put a time limit on this podcast. But
I'm way over time as usual when I'm speaking about elephants. Sorry.
No, I think, like you said, a lifetime isn't enough even just to study them. So how can a 1-hour podcast really do much justice?
No, it's lovely. Thanks so much. I mean, there's so much. I look forward to hearing from you both, because you've had exciting field sessions and exciting studies that you're doing. So I look forward to that as well. So don't just do podcasts of others, but try and see if some of us who you've sort of interacted with can come back and ask you questions as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so maybe sometime.
So thanks, Nishant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nishant. This is incredible, and I think one thing we know, and you ended with, is it's more to it than photographing elephants. So if our listeners take back one thing, it's that you're not a photographer.
If I've convinced you with that, then I'm happy. One more convert.
We had a great time recording this episode. We hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks for listening.